I had two girls some years ago who had a big problem breaking out of their social class. They were prosperous. They were vaguely unsettled and unhappy about the same experiences happening to them over and over again. Even though they were 13, they already were bored with their lives, but they were unable to cross the invisible lines that held them into a limited set of experiences. So I detached them from the school routines for several days with their parents' cooperation, and I dropped them into industrial New Jersey one morning at 4 a.m. in the middle of a fog. Two 13-year-old girls, and I had arranged for a long-distance truck driver who was on his way to North Carolina to let them ride in the cab with him to get down and watch him unload his load or detach his load, pick something else, and turn around and come back. I think it was a one-day turnaround, and it started at 4 in the morning, so I dropped them off. They were alone with the problem first of what if he didn't come to pick them up? And I said, well, there are millions of people here who travel back and forth across this river, so somewhere right nearby there must be an inexpensive way to get across the river to return home if he doesn't show up. And then, of course, the larger problems were how would they hold a day-long conversation with this man? How would they fight their own feelings of being in a science fiction movie? How would they make it worth something to them?
Putting a child alone in an unguided setting with a problem to solve is not what we do in our schools. In our classrooms, we rarely give our children chances to discover their own strength, their own inner resources. In fact, we do precisely the opposite, as we shall hear from John Taylor Gatto. Welcome to New Signals on KPFK Los Angeles at 90.7 FM. I'm Barbara Dunlap. John Taylor Gatto has been teaching in New York City schools for 26 years. Over these years, he has won the trust of his students, the resistance of many school administrators, and finally the acknowledgement of various political forces that what he has to say merits hearing. On January 31st, 1990, as John Taylor Gatto accepted their award as New York City Teacher of the Year, New York State legislators listened. At the least, it must have been confronting. Gatto tossed no bouquets of roses to the nation's culture or its school system. Let me share with you some of what Gatto said. He is speaking to all of us. We live in a time of great school crisis. We rank at the bottom of 19 industrial nations in reading, writing, and arithmetic. At the very bottom. Our teenage suicide rate is the highest in the world. And suicidal kids are rich kids for the most part, not the poor. This great school crisis is interlinked with a greater social crisis in the community. Children and old people are penned up and locked away from the business of the world to a degree without precedent. Nobody talks to them anymore. And without children and old people mixing in daily life, a community has no future and no past, only a continuous present. In fact, the name community hardly applies to the way we interact with each other. We live in networks, not communities, and everyone I know is lonely because of that. School is a major actor in this tragedy, as it is a major actor in the widening gulf among social classes. Using school as a sorting mechanism, we appear to be on the way to creating a caste system, complete with untouchables, who wander through subway trains begging and sleeping upon the streets. I've noticed a fascinating phenomenon in my years of teaching, that schools and schooling are increasingly irrelevant to the great enterprises of the planet. No one believes anymore that scientists are trained in science classes, or politicians in civics classes, or poets in English classes. The truth is that schools don't really teach anything except how to obey orders. It's not the fault of bad teachers or too little money spent. It's just impossible for education and schooling ever to be the same thing. Schools were designed by Horace Mann and by Sears and Harper of the University of Chicago and Thorndike of Columbia Teachers College and some others to be instruments of the scientific management of a mass population. Schools are intended to produce, through the application of formulae, human beings whose behavior can be predicted and controlled. Because community life, which protects the dependent and weak, is dead, and only networks remain, the only successful people in our national order are independent, self-reliant, confident, and individualistic. Well-schooled people are irrelevant. They can sell film and razor blades, push paper and talk on telephones, or sit mindlessly before a flickering computer terminal. But as human beings, they are useless. Useless to others and useless to themselves. These challenging words are those of New York City schoolteacher John Taylor Gatto. His outspoken critique of schooling comes to you over listener-sponsored KPFK, Los Angeles. Stay tuned at 90.7 FM. Remember the two well-heeled 13-year-old girls Gatto sent off on a long haul with a trucker to broaden their horizons? What happened to the girls in the with the trucker in New Jersey?
They had just a sensational time. These girls, recognizing suddenly that they weren't limited by their social class or their attitudes, and that there was a big, vast, and fascinating world out there to learn about, began to generate their own tours of that world.
And so these girls played a central role in offering their schoolmates real-life adventures as an antidote to schooling's force-fed abstractions. Gatto says, "It is absurd and anti-life to be part of a system that compels you to sit in confinement with people of exactly the same age and social class. That system effectively cuts you off from the immense diversity of life. It is absurd and anti-life to move from cell to cell at the sound of a gong for every day of your natural youth in an institution that allows you no privacy and even follows you into the sanctuary of your home, demanding that you do its homework. How will they learn to read, you say? And my answer is, when children are given whole lives instead of age-graded ones in cell blocks, they learn to read, write, and do arithmetic with ease, if those things make sense in the kind of life that unfolds around them. But keep in mind," Gatto adds, "in the United States, almost nobody who reads, writes, or does arithmetic gets much respect. We are a land of talkers. We pay talkers the most and admire talkers the most. And so our children talk constantly, following the public models of television and school teachers. It is very difficult to teach the basics anymore because they really aren't basic to the society we've made. Two institutions at present control our children's lives, television and schooling, in that order. Both of these reduce the real world of wisdom, fortitude, temperance, and justice to a never-ending, non-stop abstraction. In centuries past, the time of a child and adolescent would be occupied in real work, real charity, real adventures, and the realistic search for mentors who might teach what you really wanted to learn. A great deal of time was spent in community pursuits, practicing affection, learning how to make a home, and dozens of other tasks necessary to become a whole man or woman.
If you want people to specialize, if you want your typist to only type and your janitor to only dump wastebaskets, you really have to breed a new type of person that never existed before.